So for today, we will be working on our oil pastel texture exercise. So as you can see over on the right side of the screen, I have my worksheet that we will be creating. And I also have the technique terms that we have been working with along the left side, which you also have access to on Canvas. For this exercise, you will be working with the full sheet that you worked on yesterday or in the first exercise. And you simply are going to be opening that up and working on this right side for this next exercise. So hatching, embossing, scumbling, sgraffito, and then combining all of these techniques. So first and foremost, we're going to redefine what hatching is. So hatching is lines that are straight, placed next to each other to create texture or value. Closer together creates darker value or more of a condensed color, and further away makes a lighter value or a lighter version of that color. In the same shape, you are also going to be working with embossing. Embossing is scraping lines onto paper with a silent tool. And what I mean by a silent tool is a tool that doesn't actually make a mark, but makes an indentation in the paper itself. So I'm going to show you my example from a previous exercise. You can see this at the top over here. So over here I have my hatching, and over here I have my embossing. And let me actually zoom in on this and make this a little smaller. Okay, so you can see clearly these little lines that I have embossed in the paper. So this is a technique that is sometimes a little bit tricky to fully translate. It works best on this paper that you all are working with. On like computer paper, it doesn't work so well because you can't really indent the paper as easily. Sometimes what also helps is having a couple of pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. Thankfully, on this paper, you also have this back side so that you have some cushion to work with. So first and foremost, what I'm going to be doing is creating some designs or lines, and you have a few tools already with you that will work really well for this. First is going to be your pen cap, and then another tool that works really well is also a paper clip. The only thing with a paper clip is sometimes it can rip the paper if you push too hard. So a lot of times what I do is I use more of the side of it, kind of pulling it this direction rather than going up and down at the paper. So I'm going to play around with a few of these, making some curvy lines, and you'll be able to see these a bit clearer when we actually go through and add in some color. And also you can do some of these same techniques. You can see actually in my example, this texture right here is just like hatching, and that's what I'm going to do in this little area. And you can really think about how you might use this technique for different things. It can work really well to add texture to fabric, add texture to landscapes. The only difference with this portion is the fact that you are not covering every single paper bit that you are used to covering, unlike what we've been doing so far. Also, sometimes I can use the top of a tool that's circular if it has enough of an edge to it to create another shape. So in this case, I'm going to kind of wiggle in my circle. Oh, yep, that actually worked. And wiggle in another little circle and another little guy. And then I'm going to come in here and play around with my pen cap. You'll see my pen cap can make thicker lines than my paper clip, just because simply it is thicker. I can use different edges of it. So now that I have that done, there is a technique called buffing that actually is required when you do hatching. So as you can see in my definitions towards the left side, buffing is for soft, light areas. So either rubbing it onto your fingertip or onto a soft cloth, and then the color is lightly buffed into the surface. So there's two ways that I like to do this. One is with a paper towel, and then another way is with my finger. And this can work out really, really well. The reason that you don't put the oil pastel straight onto the paper is because that pressure sometimes will fill in all of those fun little gaps that you've already created. So I'm going to add, actually let me grab a stronger color. I'm going to add, let's do blue, onto this paper towel. I'm not going to put a ton on, just enough that I can maybe get some off onto the paper. And then I'm going to wrap it around my finger and start kind of buffing or doing a circular motion to get that onto the paper itself. And you can see those lines are starting to show up. If you do this on your finger, it's a little trickier and kind of a little, obviously, messier, but it still does work really well. Your hands being warmer will help get that pigment onto your finger, and you can see now mine is nice and purple. And I can come in here and actually control where that pigment actually goes on. This is a little bit better if you're doing more detailed areas. And obviously you can use multiple tools to do this. It doesn't have to be one way or another. If you find a way that works, go for it. And the cool part about this is you can also mix colors. So you can see my blue and my purple is starting to mix. I'm gonna sneak in with some red and start adding that into over here. And you can see those circles actually did translate pretty well. That's from the cap of my skinny Sharpie. Honestly, if you want a stronger color, like a stronger pigment, I would use your finger, because your finger will heat up the oil pastel and more will come off on your finger and you'll have a stronger color. Where just adding it to a paper towel, enough comes off, but it's going to take a bit of time. And sometimes if you have a rougher paper towel, it can actually rip your paper a little or make it a little fuzzy. And we don't necessarily want a fuzzy paper. We don't want to have all of like the little pills that can show up. So like I was saying, buffing is actually a technique that you can use. This is the only exception to my rule of all of the paper bits have to be covered. If you want to do a technique like this, simply doing what I'm doing right over here, that's not going to be enough. You need to have some thought and some effort going in. So maybe we have a bit of colors that are layered, and you're making a mix. I'm getting some more purple onto my finger. So this is much more time consuming, but it has a very specific effect that can actually turn out really, really nice and give a really cool effect to your paper. The reason I'm doing the buffing on this right side is because I'm going to layer some hatching over top. So as you can see, this first shape is more experimentation. So this is not as cut and dry or straightforward as other assignments that we have worked on this far. It really is focusing on your experimentation with the material, seeing what it can do and how it all works together. So I just need to make sure that I do see that you experimented with hatching and experimented with embossing and buffing, which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to get a little bit more on there. Perfect. Okay. So once you have like a decent amount of that paper covered, you can actually come back in with some oil pastel and play around with the hatching. As you can see on my example, I do have some hatching going on. I wanted to play around with some optical mixing. So maybe I add in some blues, some of my light blues. So in this case, hatching on top of buffing, you don't need to have it solid underneath because you can see how that kind of creates a really cool effect. I wish you could see this in person because it has kind of this fun play on the colors with the different thickness of material. Maybe I sneak in some blues on top of here. So the whole key and point of this is letting some of those underneath colors show through. So like I have some red over here, and I'm going to maybe put some pink on top. And I want that red to kind of sit in that same area. Maybe I sneak some pink up there. Maybe I sneak in some of this rusty yellow color, which yes, of course, isn't the most pretty, but it is more of a earth tone color. So if you're trying to create something that's a little bit more earth tony rather than straight purples and pinks and blues, this can actually create a really nice, cool effect and creating a little bit more of a natural earth tone. And maybe coming in with a little bit of the rusty red, sneak that in. So maybe this upper corner becomes a little darker, a little more natural. Sneak some of that rusty red next to the red that's towards the bottom. Maybe I even come in with some white. So this is where I want you to really experiment with the different colors that you haven't experimented with yet, seeing how they all work. So you can even hatch with white over top of colors, and the white will very slightly blend as you are working with them. So if you get messy and outside of the lines, I only got a little bit of messy going on. You're just going to clean that up really quick.